The Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center here in Skokie is a remarkable new structure. It's dedicated to preserving the memories of the many lives that were lost in the Holocaust. This museum is also being used to educate current and future generations about the need to combat hatred, prejudice, and indifference. It's been many, many years, and for many years people wouldn't tell their stories. Sam, I'll begin with you, author of the book, Sammy, Child Survivor of the Holocaust. Did you go through a long period of time where you couldn't tell your story or wouldn't?
Paul, I didn't want to. I came here when I was 12 years old after going through the whole Holocaust, and I was adopted in Northbrook. Couldn't speak English. You know, I just wanted to be one of the kids. I want to play baseball. I want to do. So even my adoptive parents I didn't talk to. Yeah, I cried at night when I was sleeping. My mother sat at my bed, we cried together, but I never talked about it through grade school, through high school, through college, and through the business world.
Did people even know that you were a survivor?
And not really, because I just had my 50th reunion from New Jersey. And there was, my picture was in the Tribune. We were collecting artifacts, and they said, "Wow, Sam, I feel terrible. I know you so well, you know." So they didn't know. And then they all started going out to lunch with me. They wanted to know more about it.
And we want to know the story. And I know we can read the book, Sammy's Child Survivor of the Holocaust, but Sam, you were born in 1935.
Yes.
And tell us your story.
I was 4 years old when we were sitting and having lunch. We heard noises outside. We went outside, and there were airplanes shooting at each other. As a little kid, that sounded good. Then pretty soon I saw the airplanes going down in flames. You see, my town of Dęblin, Poland, which is near Warsaw, it had an Air Force. That's where the Polish Air Force got its training, so they came there first. And then pretty soon the Nazis came down, and I remember running on fields, and the Nazis started shooting at the people, and I was introduced to pain and death right then and there. Next thing I know, the Nazis come into our house. They drag my father out. They break sticks, and they start beating him. My brother's hiding in the woods. He sees it all happening, carries him home, and I remember my father laying there with flesh ripped apart. That was just the beginning.
And what did your father do for a living? Did they think he was a spy?
My father, no, he was a sofer. He wrote the Torah. He had a big white quill, and he sat day and night writing the Torah. He was very visible.
And eventually you found your way, your family found its way to a camp. Which camp? You were in two. Which was your first camp?
The first one was Dęblin. When first the Nazis came, they had an Aussiedlung, which means they came in and they lined the Jews up, and they went into cattle cars to Treblinka or Sobibor. I was in that same line, and my father pushed me out of the line. He says, "Go over there, there's some brick site over there, hide behind those bricks." And I ran there, I heard shooting behind me. I don't think they were shooting at me, I don't know. There was shooting going on all along while the people were lined up in the town square. I saw those lines pretty soon starting to walk in the direction of the cattle cars. And in my mind, they're still marching in that direction. It's the last I saw my parents, my sisters, my brothers. I'm the youngest of seven, only two sisters surviving. And they all went into those cattle cars, and neighbors and friends and everything.
And eventually you left that camp, and you yourself ended up on one of those cars.
The Russians came close, and so they needed, the Nazis needed, they needed slaves in Częstochowa. There's a bullet factory. So they took all the Jews and they put them in the cattle cars. And I was in there too, and we ended up in Częstochowa concentration camp.
When I hear that story, Fritzie, you were in one of probably the most well-known camps, Auschwitz-Birkenau. I don't know why we know that one more than others. We do, that death camp. Tell us about your family, though, before you went. How did it begin for your family?
It began, actually, we knew when Hitler came into power. We lived in a country there was Czechoslovakia at the time. It is now under the Ukraine government. But we lived in freedom until, for many years while all this was going on in Germany. We knew. My grandparents lived close to the Polish border, and we used to visit. And so these Jews that were being persecuted in Germany used to cross the border come and look for a Jewish home and ask for food and shelter. So we knew Jews were being persecuted, but we still lived in peace until I woke up one morning to go to school with a friend, my girlfriend, who slept in my house, in my bed. Walked into school. She was allowed to go into class. A man teacher held his hand up to me and told me, Jews are not allowed to walk into class any longer. All the Jewish children in our community were sent home that morning. My mother waited for us, my two brothers and myself, and had to tell us the facts of life. We're now occupied by the German government. We now have to obey all of Hitler's rules and have to follow different orders. And this is how it really started for us.
When you were brought to the camps, we talked about this earlier, I asked you whether you had a number because I've seen survivors, they show me their number. You didn't have a number on you. You learned why you didn't have a number.
The lady that's in charge of Auschwitz concentration camp, her name is Teresa. She explained this to me when I visited the camp. She said she knew exactly what barrack I was in. She knew exactly what transport I came on. And she said when our transport came, the camp was so full that everyone was to go into the gas chambers, directly into the gas chambers. And so somehow or other, I was one of the lucky ones and fell through the cracks.
So no number because there was no need to catalog you because you were set to die immediately.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I know in talking to a survivor who's a friend of mine, she said, Paul, no matter how bad you think it was, picture the worst of the worst in your mind. It was 4,000 times worse than that.
There's just no way to describe it. There's just no way. How do you describe hunger to someone that's sitting with a full stomach? People think it's dieting or skipping breakfast or skipping lunch. And how do you explain hunger where the pit of your stomach is so sore that you would sell your soul for a potato? How do you explain living with death day in and day out? How do you explain living with Dr. Mengele where you had to walk through, get undressed, and walk in this line, and there's this selection. One row goes this way, one row goes this way. One row goes directly to the gas chambers, one row goes back into the barracks. You don't know which row you're in. You don't know if you're in the good row or the bad row. How do you explain waking up in the morning, the person on one side or the other side of you is dead? You have to pick them up with someone's help and bring them and put them in front of the barracks to be counted. It's called appel. How do you explain watching all your friends dying in front of you? How do you explain the lookout posts, the dogs? I can tell you what a dog can do. I avoided dogs for years and years. There's no way to explain Auschwitz. If I sat here from today till tomorrow, I couldn't explain it.
I've been to Auschwitz, I've seen it, it's astounding to see. And I mentioned to Sam earlier, I looked and I thought it would be grand, that is to say huge gates and huge, and it's not. It looked like if you were there, just get out, jump a fence, go.
Auschwitz is not as small as you think. Auschwitz is divided into many camps. There's the men's camp, there's Auschwitz-Birkenau, there was Buna, there was divided. If you were in Auschwitz and you went up on one of those lookout posts, they still have, your eye couldn't take in all the areas that is part of Auschwitz concentration camp.
Much of it is gone now.
It's huge. Much of it is gone now. Some of the barracks have been torn down. It's become a museum. But you know, the fence is still there. The barbed wires are still there. What you need to understand when you say about escape, there was no escape. You went as far as the ditch before the barbed wires. If you came too close, they would shoot at you. The wires were so strong, the electricity was so strong that if you came near it, you could commit suicide. So oftentimes in the morning when we would wake up, the wires were full of bodies because people did commit suicide, but there was no escape from Auschwitz. It was impossible to escape. We had to stand at appel twice a day in front of each barrack. They would line us up, and we stand at appel to be counted. If one person was missing, we had to stand for hours and hours and hours at appel. If it rained, if it snowed, if it was hot, if it was cold, we just stood there with rags on our feet and blankets, possibly if somebody had a blanket. We were in rags in the winter and just stood until that person was found.
This is the fountain of the righteous. These are the names of non-Jews who at great personal risk hid children and families of Jewish people from the Nazis and from the death camps. They did it at great risk to themselves because had they been caught, they would have been killed as well. But they did it because it was right. The Holocaust Museum and Education Center here in Skokie carries a powerful message that we must never forget what has happened in the past, and we must ensure that it never happens in the future by teaching the children what is right. It still goes on around the world, but perhaps one day we can remember the past to transform the future. I'm Paul Lisnek, and thank you for joining us. Representing the 16 million American men and women who fought during World War II and the 400,000 who gave their lives, the World War II Memorial stands to honor the commitment, the spirit, and the sacrifice of America's fighting forces during the war. It's also come to represent who we've become as a people.
As they pull up toward the World War II Memorial, they exit the buses to the cheers of local school children who have come to welcome them. Some had seen photos of it. Others have heard it described. But no veteran could foresee this sprawling and expansive site which will forever commemorate their sacrifice and commitment. Many vets are overwhelmed by their first glimpse of its beautiful fountains, which are encircled by 56 massive granite pillars, each representing a state or territory during the war. They gaze over the monument for only a short time before all 93 veterans begin to gather at the Memorial Center for a ceremony to honor their departed comrades.
We're here today to dedicate a flag and make a presentation of a wreath in honor of all of our departed comrades. Post colors!
As the color guard enters the memorial, the veterans come to attention and proudly salute the stars and stripes. The American flag brought from Chicago is dedicated, and a wreath is presented in memory of their fellow soldiers who've been lost.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands.
The memories of those men and women will be honored here forever.
With justice and liberty for all.
For the veterans who remain missing in action, and for those who were prisoners of war and never returned home, an empty chair occupies a place of dignity in the front row. It is kept open for their return, and for now, it is a symbol of their continued absence.
Those who have served and those currently serving the U.S. military are ever mindful that the sweetness of enduring peace has always been tainted by the bitterness of personal sacrifice.
Speaking at today's ceremony is Chicago businessman Steve Wilson. An avid supporter of Honor Flight, Steve's generosity as benefactor of this flight has enabled all 93 veterans to take their trip today. The short ceremony concludes with the eloquent and solemn call of taps. These vets have certainly heard these tones many times before, but today it undoubtedly takes on a special meaning and triggers great emotion in the hearts of these brave heroes and the others who come to honor them today. As each veteran exits the plane, they're greeted by several high-ranking members of the United States military. It's a fitting tribute for any returning military veteran. But these are not just any veterans. There are no words to describe their expressions as they come upon the scene that awaits them in the terminal. As far as their eyes can see, members of each military branch are standing at attention. The youngest and newest members of the military are on hand this evening to honor the oldest and most decorated. Every member of the military that lines the corridor salutes each veteran as they pass. Leading the vets forward, the Chicago Police and Fire Department bagpipers pay their own respect.
I brought this in for you. I hope you enjoyed this welcome. We appreciate it.
The veterans soon come across hundreds of Vietnam War vets, and while they're veteran heroes themselves, tonight these Vietnam vets join in the celebration to welcome back the men and women of World War II. As the veterans make their way downstairs to baggage claim, where today's journey began, they are greeted by the roar of the thousands of people that are now awaiting their arrival home.
Our heroes have touched down!
The vets now receive the public cheers and appreciation that many of them never received 65 years ago.
USA! 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 USA!
And finally, a special and personal surprise for each veteran. While some have expected a family member to arrive to take them home, none have anticipated that many members of their family would be awaiting their arrival tonight. Many veterans remain in disbelief at the sight of the elaborate tribute and large crowds that have gathered, perhaps questioning whether they're worthy of such an honor. Rest assured, the entire country stands in unison and agreement on one thing, that all our surviving veterans of World War II are truly deserving of such a day they will remember for the rest of their lives, a day a grateful country says thank you, a true day of honor.
Abraham Lincoln was a role model for every president since his time, and also for each of us. Our 16th president, Lincoln, saved our Union and took steps to free those who were enslaved, and all in the face of ongoing personal challenges and tragedy. From his simple roots in Kentucky and Indiana, it is our own Illinois that is the most identifiable with this greatest of all presidents. He began as a young lawyer and member of the state legislature, and then embarked on a remarkable journey to the White House. Join me as we walk through the past to understand our president. Walk with me in the footsteps of Lincoln. At the center of the museum is the plaza, an open gathering place and central orientation point from which all the galleries and areas of the museum can be accessed. From the plaza, visitors are welcome to travel through the remarkable life and times of Abraham Lincoln, from his early childhood through his presidency. Your journey begins as you enter Lincoln's childhood log cabin home. A young Lincoln sits nearby on a stump, deep in thought, with a book in his hand. The original Lincoln family home is long lost. This recreation, nestled in the woods of Indiana where Lincoln grew up, has been assembled from authentic log cabins of the mid-19th century, which have been configured to represent a realistic image of the one-room boyhood cabin home of our nation's 16th president. In the cabin, you see Lincoln as a teen, reading books by firelight. His father, Thomas Lincoln, his stepmother, Sally Johnston Bush Lincoln, and his 4 siblings are asleep nearby. The Barry Lincoln store was Lincoln's first business venture in New Salem, Illinois. This recreation is where you will see an awkward young Lincoln with Anne Rutledge. According to legend, Lincoln was in love with Miss Rutledge, although the feeling was not mutual. Lincoln's early life in Springfield is also explored, including his courtship of Mary Todd, who he would later marry in 1842. Here, in a replica of the Lincoln Herndon Law Office, you see the permissive Lincoln stretched out on the couch, blissfully reading a newspaper while his young boys, Willie and Tad, have a fun time creating a joyous chaos out of their dad's office. The museum showcases a history of Lincoln's political career, beginning with a recreation of the Lincoln-Douglas senatorial debate of 1858. Now, Lincoln lost that election, but would go on to defeat Mr. Douglas 2 years later in the 1860 race for the U.S. presidency. Upon returning to the museum's center plaza, you stroll upon the Lincoln family's arrival in Washington, D.C. as America's newest first family. We see the Lincolns posed in front of the White House as it appeared back in 1861. Here in Lincoln's White House office, we observe Lincoln unveiling his plans to issue the Emancipation Proclamation to his cabinet. We see each cabinet member disapprove of this political move, each expressing their displeasure in their own way. Some said the order was too broad, while others said it didn't reach far enough. This look back at the life of Abraham Lincoln actually provides us a glimpse into the future. We may not know for sure what current or future presidents will do, but we do know that the solid and stable nature of our union will always depend on those who follow in the footsteps of Lincoln.